Hello, everyone, and welcome to the session on contract lifecycle management technology that goes beyond the concept of return on investment to calculating real-world value. My name is Peggy Barber. I'm the America's CEO and General Counsel for IACCM. Before I joined IACCM last October, I worked for many years at Hewlett-Packard, where my key focus was on contracting and commercial excellence. I'm a passionate advocate for the importance of contracting to business success, and I'm very excited to be hosting this session with Colin Earle, CEO and founder of Agiloft. Colin, would you start us off by introducing yourself and Agiloft to the audience?
Thank you, Peggy. My name is Colin Earle, and I'm the CEO and founder of Agiloft, a provider of contract and commerce lifecycle management, or CCLM software. Agiloft has been named PC Magazine Editor's Choice for contract management software for the past 4 years in a row, and was rated Value Leader by the Spend Matters analysts. Our customers range from global giants like Roche to growing startups like Shopify. And I have both a professional and personal interest in ROI. As a CEO, I need to ensure that our customers enjoy strong and predictable return. And with my engineering background, I really like things to be quantifiable. I'd like to start with a number, 7,000. That's the average cost in US dollars, according to the IACCM, of processing an average contract. And the cost for complex contracts can run much higher. But that's just the cost of administering the contract, the time it takes for lawyers to draft and review and approvers to approve and so on. It does not take into account the costs associated with vendors or customers fulfilling the terms, the risks of failing to comply with regulatory mandates, or even security considerations. Given how central contracts and related documents are to conducting any kind of business, that's an astonishingly high number. And by the way, we did some primary research with our customer base to validate, and they confirmed that it was in the right ballpark. Even more astonishing is the number of companies that have no idea how much time and effort they spend on managing contracts or associated documents, let alone the P&L and risk exposure. According to Gartner, more than 85% of organizations don't have an enterprise CCLM system. Many organizations have multiple departmental systems that do not communicate, while others rely on flat files and spreadsheets. But it is changing. Gartner expects that in the next 4 years, 90% of global enterprises and 50% of mid-sized companies will have a CCLM system in place. In fact, it was the top subject for Gartner analyst inquiries in 2018, and contracting technologies were the top topic in an IACCM survey of its users. So, if you're planning on getting a CCLM system, what kind of ROI can you expect, and how can you maximize the value of your investment? The first step is to identify what matters, and then measure it using standard industry metrics. In this webinar, we'll discuss how to quantify the ROI of CCLM with KPIs for business operations, risk, and compliance, how your value assessment compares to industry benchmarks, and best practices to reduce costs, increase efficiency, and strengthen security and compliance. But first, a quick word about the methodology we use to determine the value of CCM and industry measures of ROI. We began by surveying our customer base and talked in depth to individual managers. We had extensive discussions with industry analysts on what they were seeing. We benchmarked metrics from research conducted by experts such as IACCM, Goldman Sachs, and others. And we created a value model that quantified specific measures, vetted it against real-world numbers provided by our customers, and followed up with an open discussion at an advisory council meeting. So here's what we found. The primary motivation for implementing CCLM was not minimizing the costs associated with administering contracts or even speeding up the workflows. It was to achieve regulatory compliance, followed closely by security concerns. In fact, most of our customers did not do any ROI modeling before deciding to move ahead with a CLM system, and industry findings were similar. One analyst noted that legal departments looked at CCLM systems as insurance policies against compliance and security risks. Nevertheless, experts point to areas where CCLM does generate direct value from operational efficiencies, benefits to the bottom line of monitoring and managing contractual obligations on both the sell side and buy side. I'll present some industry benchmarks and some best practices around how to get the maximum return on your investment in each of these areas based on our primary research. Let's start with operational efficiencies, since these bring the most obvious and immediate benefits. The IACCM quotes an average cost of $7,000 per contract, so where does that number come from, and how credible is it? Most of it is in personnel costs in coordinating between departments. The average contract goes through over a dozen handoffs, back and forth between sales, legal, procurement, finance, etc., and is often scattered across systems such as email, CRM, and ERP. It's a particularly insidious cost because it's hidden. Most companies have no idea how much time, effort, and money they spend on processing contracts. The first step to reducing these costs is to get an understanding of your current state. Some metrics you may want to look at are average time spent processing a contract, the average number of contracts executed per team member, the average response time for each workflow member, the average legal spend per contract, the average contract turnaround time, and the fully loaded personnel costs. A CCLM system allows you to automate most of this. One of our larger customers did a financial analysis of just the time the legal department spent manually routing contracts and executives spent approving contracts and related documents before automation. They found the cost per contract came in at just under $5,000, not far from the IACCM's estimate of $7,000, and a big chunk of the legal budget. That was before implementing CCLM. Afterwards, it was just $2,500. And they're processing thousands of contracts a year, so the savings are in tens of millions. Automation also provided a number of interesting insights. For example, what everyone thought of as a busy season for contract creation was in fact a relatively light time. The conventional wisdom on where the workflow bottlenecks were was also completely inaccurate. Automation now provides the executive team with a dashboard that shows how many contracts are under review in different categories, sales, purchasing, etc. It allows them to flag contracts that were risky or not compliant with company policies, and it automates follow-up on contracts that are up for renewal or require executive action. Let's turn our attention to sales. According to the IACCM, companies lose 9.2% of annual revenue due to poor contract management practices. The number varies, of course. Some of our customers who did an in-depth analysis before deploying Agiloft reported a figure of 5%, while companies in the oil and gas industry found that it was above 9%. But even 5% represents $50 million a year for a billion-dollar company. So where does the number come from? Well, it ranges from faster sales cycles to managing performance obligations and properly identifying and killing contracts that are out of date or no longer profitable. I'm going to combine both the sell side and the vendor management side into a discussion on P&L value, starting with sales cycles. Especially for companies whose sales require a lot of contracts, shepherding contracts through the approval process can be a big time sink for salespeople, taking away from time that could be spent on selling. On the purchasing side, there's a similar process for sourcing suppliers, negotiating the contract, and managing the vendor relationship. Performance obligations refer to whether the customer or vendor is meeting the terms and conditions in the contract. For example, contracts that involve rebates and discounts need to be tracked and managed. Trying to keep track of these without CCLM results in inefficiencies that end up costing real money on both the buy and sell side. Another common example is contract renewals. Managing renewals consistently shows up as a big pain point. When renewals are not properly monitored, they can lead to underpayments from customers and overpayments to vendors. An added advantage is that the data you get from a CCLM system allows you to adjust your terms to maximize value. Does this all add up to 9%, 5%, or 15%? It depends on the company, and the only way to find out is to do the analysis. Some KPIs to measure P&L benefits include tracking and enforcing negotiated discount levels, average sales cycle time, proposal volume, the number and average value of contracts that include a renewal component. Next, let's look at managing risk. As we found out from our discussions with customers and analysts, the number one driver for implementing CCLM is not operational efficiency or maximizing profitability. It's managing risk. Because even the most deep-pocketed, technology-savvy companies cannot afford to be complacent about the risks associated with their enterprise. Facebook's experience with Cambridge Analytica is a perfect example. To recap, in 2013, an academic named Dr. Alexander Kogan created a little Facebook app called This Is Your Digital Life, which asks users questions for a psychological profile. In violation of Facebook's contractual terms, he then sold users' responses and their personal data to Cambridge Analytica. As a result of this scandal, users lost trust in Facebook and stopped using the platform. The company finally took steps to improve and automate detection of contractual breaches, but the damage was already done. The stock plunged, erasing $150 billion of market value in 90 minutes, and the company is still in damage control mode. Data security. Security risks associated to digital data are among the most difficult to police. Contracts contain all kinds of sensitive information, whether it's valuable IP, pricing information, or confidential customer and employee data. Not keeping contracts in a secure access control system is a recipe for disaster. And far more organizations have suffered from data theft by their own employees than outside hackers. Legal mandates such as HIPAA, Sarbanes-Oxley, and GDPR make the business world into a regulatory minefield. In a typical contract, 10% of the language describes the obligations of each party or the business purpose of the contract. The other 90% assigns responsibility for who's liable if something goes wrong. If you're using humans to monitor compliance, it's going to be prohibitively expensive, and like Facebook, you're likely to miss things that then blow up. Building compliance into your contract management system is a much more sustainable proposition. It's hard to measure the risk mitigation value because there's an intangible aspect to it. And while the risk may be small, it's one of the few things that has the potential to bring down the entire organization. Some KPIs to watch for risk and compliance include whether or not you're currently in full compliance with regulatory mandates, the cost of maintaining and documenting that compliance for audits, the contract risk score, and internal risk reduction value. To summarize, our research pointed to 5 major categories of value associated with CCLM systems. These are represented by bubbles on this chart. Operational efficiencies. Most organizations measure ROI of a CCLM system purely in terms of efficiencies from automating the workflows around legal operations as measured in man-hours saved. Goldman Sachs estimates CCLM systems save 20% of operational costs. Purchasing refers to the efficiencies gained from better vendor management. Hackett Group estimates savings from actions like vendor consolidation can amount to 12% of total spend. Sales operations are the lift you get from increased sales. Aberdeen estimates a 24% reduction in sales cycle time, 20% higher lead conversion, and 12% higher proposal volume. The IACCM summarizes this as 9.2% of sales on average. But there are no benchmarks for security and compliance value, so how do we calculate the value for these metrics? After talking with our customers' business stakeholders, we were able to determine a value model that takes security and compliance into account. Now let's check those benchmarks with what we saw in the real world of our customer data. Customer data from savings from operations ranged from 5% to 33%, with an average percentage savings around 20%, consistent with Goldman Sachs' estimate. For savings from purchasing, our customer data showed a savings range from 0.5% to 20% of total spend. The average came in at 8%, which is 4% below what the Hackett Group estimates. Sales operations. Our customer numbers range from 0 to 15% revenue uplift, with the 0 coming from government organizations that were using system purely for purchasing. The average revenue uplift was over 5%, a little over half of what the IACCM estimates. Even so, for a $100 million company, $5 million is a significant number. Security. What we found is that our customers are valuing the risk reduction associated with enhanced data security and survivability at between 5 times and 80 times the operational savings. This factor will be different for different verticals and company sizes, but it's a massive value that has gone unmeasured until now. An important aspect of security that's often overlooked is data survivability. What happens to your data in the event of a natural disaster, such as a tornado or flood that destroys the entire data center? That's why Gartner recommends that critical systems are replicated to a fully redundant server that's located at least 500 miles away from the master system. Regulatory compliance was valued at between 20 times and 100 times the operational savings, or as high as 30% of annual revenues. Again, this factor will differ by industry. So how can you calculate your own ROI? We developed a customer-driven CCLM calculator that quantifies value based on your circumstances. It's a wizard that walks you through the necessary inputs, including the TCO of your system. Once you've entered the necessary information, the model outputs value metrics for each of the 5 categories we've discussed, which you can then compare to industry benchmark as well as the overall ROI for the system. A final word about security and compliance risk. One of the big takeaways from our research on the ROI of CCLM systems is however compelling the operational and bottom line benefits of CCLM, they were far outweighed by the risks associated with mitigating security and compliance failure. But not all systems are created equal when it comes to managing risk. Some things to look for in a CCLM system are well-defined permissions. A system that manages access with precise permission settings is critical to ensuring data security. Leading CCLM software allows organizations to configure access permissions down to the document field level and apply varying levels of permissions based on location, group, or individual user. In addition to standard features like two-factor authentication and data encryption, these features can ensure your most valuable IP, customer data, and contracts do not end up in the wrong hands. A data repository that automates compliance and includes a full audit trail. A leading solution will enable you to easily audit current contracts to ensure they have the appropriate clauses related to data privacy, arbitration, confidentiality, and other regulations that affect your business. Once you've identified the gaps, your legal team can update the contracts with the appropriate language and contact any third-party signatories. A CCLM system also includes a central repository for all your contracts, which help tracks other kind of compliance and allows advanced systems to trigger business process automation to streamline operations. Rule-based approval workflows and automatic notifications allow you to track operational compliance or the terms and conditions of your contract. A capable CCLM system can track contract expirations and renewals associated with hundreds of vendors in addition to accounting for discounts and other contract obligations. And on the revenue side, it can match insurance payments against the services delivered. That way, you get up-to-date cost and renewal information, eliminate overpayments, and provide visibility into the revenue cycle. The result is cost savings and better use of resources. It also enables better business insights that help companies make good strategic decisions. System scalability should be a priority for any business relying on automation for contract management. If the system is not able to handle at least 4 times the typical peak load, you may be at risk of a major outage or performance issue. This can mean missed contract renewals, expirations, missed business opportunities, and a huge hit to brand reputation and revenue. Also, if the system is not able to adapt rapidly, you're signing up for months or years of costly delays. If you're not able to easily configure new process workflows, contract clauses, business rules, or software integrations, then you run the risk of outgrowing the software and never keeping on top of the ever-evolving business needs of the users. Multiple levels of redundancy, including replication in real time to a slave server at least 500 miles away from the master, can protect you against data loss. And lastly, any software implementation exposes the business to a certain level of risk. According to the Standards Group Chaos Report, only 29% of enterprise software implementations are truly successful. When selecting a vendor, you can mitigate this risk by asking them to provide a satisfaction guarantee on software and services. The value of the guarantee is not getting your money back. It's that the vendors who are willing to guarantee your success are genuinely confident of the quality of their services and the accuracy of the implementation quote. In conclusion, I'd like to thank you for your attention and turn it over to Peggy for the Q&A.
Great. Hi, everyone. So a few questions that have come up in our Q&A session. And so let me just look at the questions. The first one, just want to make sure everybody knows that your emails, you'll get an email that shows the slides, links to the slides and the registration, the recording after this session. So one more time, you'll get a email after the session. If you registered, you'll get an email that has a link to the slides and the recording that'll be posted on the IACCM website. So a few questions on the website. First, for you, Colin, we've all heard CLM. Why do you and Agiloft use CCLM?
The primary reason is that the benefit from contract lifecycle management comes not only from managing the contracting process and automating the processes around that, but from dealing with all the things that surround contracts. And I gave one example, the Fraser Health. They began with CLM. That formed the kind of nub of the system. But the real benefit came after they integrated their suppliers into that workflow process. And they got to the point today where their contracts with their vendors, in this case hospitals, allow them not only to find a bed for a patient, but to book that patient into the bed through the system. An operation that used to take as much as a week is cut down to a few mouse clicks. And the commerce portion of the contracting process varies between companies. Obviously, for an aerospace company, the processes around contracting are very different to that of a hospital company. But in all cases, they're to do with the management of commerce, where CLM forms the kind of legal representation of that process. The commerce forms the actual implementation of it.
Great. And the connections to then the rest of the business and the business implications for that. So that's fantastic. How much does a typical CLM system cost? How are they priced for people who are in the audience that may be looking at this for the first time?
It varies wildly. For many organizations, you can put in place a simple system in the space of a few weeks worth of effort. And costs run $10,000, $15,000 a year. For large enterprises, it can run into millions of dollars.
Do you see the pricing coming up? I know that there, in terms of justifying the cost of a CLM system, many people struggle with that concept, and how do you do that with the transactions that you are trying to also cover through the systems?
You can use Agiloft's ROI calculator to calculate dollar value return from the 5 areas that we discussed today. Yeah, the most conservative view is provided by Goldman Sachs, and they estimated savings at 20%, but that's for operational costs. It doesn't take into account the compliance value, the increase in security, or the other attributes which, as we saw, really make up the vast majority of the ROI in the system. In fact, our customers report the number one reason that people choose a CLM system is to reduce their exposure to risk. And risk here means regulatory compliance followed by security considerations.
So there's a question, how do you provide support to customers after implementation of the CCLM system?
Well, for our support services, we have 24/7 support for enterprise customers, 24/5 support for many other customers, and the default is for US customers who don't have any premium support plan, support from 3 a.m. Pacific time to 8 p.m. Pacific time, which covers pretty much everyone.
Great. Some folks, as they are looking to implement a CCLM or CLM system, find some challenges with their IT departments in terms of just various questions or concerns that may come up. What are some of the common ones that have come up in your experience, and what are suggestions for how to address them?
The primary concern from IT departments is the taking on of yet another enterprise software deployment, and they're rightly concerned that enterprise software is not immune from risks, and indeed, according to the Standish Group Chaos Report, only 29% of IT projects succeed. 19% are utter failures. They just belly flop. And McKinsey reports that 17% of large IT projects are executed so poorly that they actually threaten the existence of the company. Now, the primary response to that is simply to ask the vendor to take on a portion of the risk. Ask the vendor to guarantee the success of the implementation. And that guarantee, of course, has to extend not only to the software, but to the implementation services that surround it, because implementation can cost as much or significantly more than the software itself in the first year. If you do this, you achieve two things. Firstly, a vendor will only guarantee success if they're genuinely confident that they can meet your requirements. And secondly, you ensure that the vendor provides an accurate implementation estimate. And I'm sorry to say that in the industry, it's not uncommon for vendors to lowball the estimate and then increase prices once a customer's locked in. But if you're asking them for an unconditional guarantee, they're really precluded from doing that. If they try pulling that kind of shenanigan, you can just walk away from the contract and say you're canceling. The value is not, of course, that you'll get your money back. It's that you won't need to ask.
Right, right. And that you have some assurance. I mean, for somebody to really put that satisfaction guaranteed agreement up front, as you said, really some level of real confidence that the right due diligence and the work has been done, and the understanding of the services involved, because I'm sure based on your experience, it really is, it's the upfront planning, and then it's actually the implementation and then adoption that that drives success of these projects. So how long, from a timing perspective, does this usually implementation of a CLM system, when done appropriately, usually take?
A CLM system for a mid-market company takes a few weeks of implementation time, are typically spread out over 2 or 3 months of elapsed time. And the reason is simply that the vendor is going back and forth with the customer, asking for clarification to their questions. And this is one of the factors that has the biggest impact on the length of the project, the level of experience of the team on the customer side, and how available they are to answer questions. Because most of these people have jobs in addition to working on the implementation of the CCLM system. One thing that we do recommend is start simple. Don't try to automate everything on the very first go around. Instead, reduce your implementation costs, and you may design a system that has every level of automation you could want, and it really kind of reflects your vision for the enterprise as a whole. But for the first implementation, put together something which just meets the basics, which is architected to expand, but meets the essential core requirements. Because every time you put an enterprise system down in front of the users, you'll find that no matter how carefully you planned, there are things they're going to want to change. And it's much cheaper and easier to add complexity to a simple system than it is to eliminate complexity from one which is overly complex.
So Colin, I think that that's a really interesting point. One of the things that people are advised to do up front is to make sure you get all the stakeholders, all the potential people who might use the system, and get them in a room and the like. And sometimes that actually ends up taking a lot more time, and then takes a long time to get everybody to agree to the requirements. And in accommodating, you're making the system actually a lot more complicated. Right through the process.
Thank you. Yes, that's an important insight.
Fantastic. So any other final thoughts, Colin? This is really, really helpful. And I think we're done with the questions in the, oh, hold on, one more. Just one more question. Right, this was really kind of a close. What key things should someone do in preparation for the implementation? So a few of the things that we are talking about here, but if you had kind of 2 or 3 best practices or things that you would consider and tell people as they're prepping for this, what due diligence should they do? What are best practices?
There's best practices in several areas. In terms of defining requirements, gather the stakeholders, and the stakeholders should include not just upper management, but the users of the system themselves, the folks at the coalface, and find out from their perspective in terms of their daily working lives, what's going to make their lives easier, more productive, and relieve them of stress. Then move up to their managers and right up to the executive chain. And each of those groups of individuals will have a different perspective on what success constitutes and how to measure it. And ideally, the system should satisfy them all. And in fact, in 90% of cases, the system will satisfy them all. Then, in terms of choosing a vendor, I mentioned get an unconditional guarantee of satisfaction and success. But also, probe the vendor. Don't just accept a pre-canned demo for a complex system. Every vendor can put together a slick demo. ask for a demo which reflects the specific needs that you've identified from discussions with your stakeholders. Ask them to show not that they can address a CLM system, but they can provide the CLM system that your organization needs. And bear in mind that enterprise software is going to have to evolve to meet the changing needs of the business users and the insights from the business users as to what they really need once a system has been delivered to them, as opposed to what they initially asked for. So the system must be adaptable. It must be easy to change. And I recommend asking the vendor to make significant changes during the course of the demo. Tell them, of course, that you're going to be doing so that they can have an application engineer available if the salesperson isn't capable of making it themselves. And then hit them up with some changes. Okay, well, we'd like to add a table here. How would we change this workflow? Show me the process. That'll provide an illustration of not just whether the system can meet your needs today, but how easy it will be to adapt to meet those needs in the future.
Great, Colin. And I think I would just add one to, an obvious one, which of course is always ask for references, ask for people who they've implemented the systems before, and, reach out to kind of your network. And you can certainly do that through IACCM, but people who have used it and can give you at least insight on how it went and things to think about and things to watch out for. So certainly based on my experience in the past, it has been, there are things that can always go better in implementations as you're going through these. So the more that you learn about experiences out there, the better your own experience will be.
Thank you, Peggy. That's a great point. And if I may, I'd just like to add one thing. Look for online reviews as well.
Yes.
Vendors will give you their most favored customer. Look for what everybody else is saying in addition to that.
Right, kind of the Yelp or
exactly,
table.
Yes.
And don't look for the 5 stars and look for the 3 stars. So, so anyway, well, Colin, thank you very much for walking us through the value of contracts and commercial lifecycle management beyond that typical ROI calculations that we see. I particularly like the ROI calculator. What a fantastic tool for those who are trying to justify investment in this area and really just to understand the full breadth of the risks and the benefits. And then also keeping users in mind and the needs of the users. So often we do design things and thinking that we know what they want, and then turns out to be completely different or not so fully understanding exactly what they do day to day. So anyway, my thanks to you and to everyone who joined us on this session. I hope you found it to be useful and that you have a fantastic rest of the day. Thanks so much.
Thank you.